I will begin with the poem that Housman considered the only good parody of a Shropshire lad. What, still alive at 22? A clean, upstanding lad like you? Sure, if your throat is hard to slit, slit your girls and swing for it. Like enough you won't be glad when they come to hang you, lad. But bacon's not the only thing that's meant to dangle from a string. So, when the spilt ink of the night spreads o'er the blotting pad of light, lads whose work is still to do will whet their blades and think of you. Now, Housman himself was well qualified to pronounce on what's a good parody. Here is Housman's fragment of a Greek tragedy. I'm not going to read it in full. It begins with a dialogue between the chorus, and then Alcmaeon comes in. O suitably attired in leather boots, head of a traveller, wherefore seeking whom, whence, by what way, how purposed art thou come to this well-nightingaled vicinity? My object in inquiring is to know, but if you happen to be deaf and dumb, and do not understand a word I say, nod with your hand to signify as much. I journeyed hither a Boeotian road, sailing on horseback or with feet for oars, plying by turns my partnership of legs, beneath a shining or a rainy Zeus. Mud's sister, not himself, adorns my shoes. And then I'm going to move down to where there's a strophe by the chorus. In speculation, I would not willingly acquire a name for ill-digested thought, but after pondering much, to this conclusion I have come: life is uncertain. And then skipping further along in Housman's fragment from a Greek tragedy, it ends with a dialogue between that chorus and Eryphila. Eryphila is within, and she begins, and then there are unrhymed couplets by each of them. Eryphila is within the house. Oh, I am smitten with a hatchet's jaw, and that in deed and not in word alone. I thought I heard a sound within the house, unlike the voice of one that jumps for joy. He splits my skull, not in a friendly way. Once more he purposes to kill me dead. I would not be reputed rash, but yet I doubt if all be gay within the house. Oh, oh, another stroke, that makes the third. He stabs me to the heart against my wish. If that be so, thy state of health is poor, but thine arithmetic is quite correct. That's obviously a parody of a Greek tragedy. Housman was having fun. You have to be careful. He was having fun partly with the way of thinking of Greek tragedians, but maybe more with unskilled translators into English. A parody can be used. Those two parodies parody the attitude of the poet and the style of the poet. Parody can be used also as a platform for commenting on matters that are outside of the poem. A model for the laureate. On thrones from China to Peru, all sorts of kings have sat, that men and women of all sorts proclaimed both good and great. And what's the odds if such as these, for reasons of the state, should keep their lovers waiting, keep their lovers waiting? Some boast of beggar kings and kings of rascals black and white, that rule because a strong white arm puts all men in a fight. And drunk or sober live at ease, where none gainsay their right, and keep their lovers waiting, keep their lovers waiting. The muse is mute when public men applaud a modern throne, those cheers that can be bought or sold, that office fools have run, that wax and seal, that signature. For things like these, what decent man would keep his lover waiting, keep his lover waiting? Now, a lot has happened since that was written. Does anybody know what historical event is referred to there? You don't recognize the abdication of King Edward VIII? Who knows the poet that's being parodied? You have to think back to almost a century. That's Masefield, who was poet laureate at the time. And that's the point of the title, a model for the laureate. And who was the poet who wrote that? A great poet. It may be the only joke this poet ever made. That's written by Yeats. Now, the abdication crisis of the 1930s produced at least one other parody of a different kind. The crisis was very short. It burst on the public at the end of November 1936 that the king wanted to marry Mrs. Simpson and make her his queen. The crisis was over by December 11th, when the now abdicated king, now His Royal Highness Prince Edward, delivered the famous abdication speech on the BBC. By Christmas of that year, children all over the United Kingdom were heard singing, "Hark the herald angels sing, Mrs. Simpson's pinched our king." Now, sometimes a parody is just funny. Here's one. There's antimony, arsenic, aluminum, selenium, and hydrogen and oxygen, and nitrogen and rhenium, and nickel, neodymium, neptunium, germanium, and iron, americium, ruthenium, uranium. Now, I would have to be able to sing like Tom Lehrer to give you the tune of the Major General song, which is what that's written for. It finishes, and chlorine, carbon, cobalt, copper, tungsten, tin, and sodium. These are the only ones of which the news has come to Harvard, and there may be many others, but they haven't been discovered. That's the master satirist of his generation, but it's not satire, he's just having fun there. If you ever listen to a recording of a Tom Lehrer performance, that is the one that invariably stops the show. Here is a more traditional parody, Up the Spout. Hi, just you drop that. Stop, I say. Shirk work, think, slink off, twist friend's wrist, where that spined sand lined bands the bay, lined blind with true seas blue as dew, promising not to pay, for the sea's debt leaves wet the sand. Burst worst fates waits in one burnt gun, a man's own yacht blown What, off land? Tack back or veer round here, then queer. Reef points, though, understand? Now, it goes on for a couple of pages. I'm going to stop there. No points if you've recognized that the poet being parodies is Robert Browning. But do you know who wrote the parody? That's Swinburne. Now, here's another Victorian parody. From the depth of the dreamy decline of the dawn, through a notable nimbus of nebulous moonshine, pallid and pink as the palm of the flag flower that flickers with fear of the flies as they float, are they looks of our lovers that lustrously lean from a marvel of mystic, miraculous moonshine, these that we feel in the blood of our blushes, that thicken and threaten with throbs through the throat? Once again, no points for knowing that that's Swinburne, but do you know who wrote the parody? Swinburne again, who was, I guess, in the 19th century, as in the 20th and 21st, poets didn't make their living by writing poetry. Poets made their living by talking and writing about poetry. Swinburne was a very active and productive literary journalist. The best parodies are by, it's not a surprise, by the greatest poets. Shakespeare was probably the greatest poet in the English language. A lot of the Shakespeare canon is parody and would have been recognized as such when his stuff was being performed. Now it's just part of the Shakespeare canon, and we don't recognize it unless we get into scholarly footnotes. And here is Lewis Carroll. "Repeat, you are old, Father William," said the caterpillar. Alice folded her hands and began. "You are old, Father William," the young man cried. "The few locks which are left you are gray. You are hale, Father William, a hearty old man. Now tell me the reason, I pray." "In the days of my youth," Father William replied, "I remembered that youth would fly fast, and abused not my health and my vigor at first, that I never might need them at last." "You are old, Father William," the young man cried, "and pleasures with youth pass away. And yet you lament not the days that are gone. Now tell me the reason, I pray." "In the days of my youth," Father William replied, "I remembered that youth could not last. I thought of the future, whatever I did, that I never might grieve for the past." Okay, I'm messing with you. That's not what Lewis Carroll wrote. That's from the annotated Alice. It's the original "You Are Old, Father William," written by Robert Southey, which Lewis Carroll used as the basis for his famous parody. "You are old, Father William," the young man said, "and your hair has become very white, and yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think at your age it is right?" "In my youth," Father William replied to his son, "I feared it might injure the brain. But now that I'm perfectly sure I have none, why, I do it again and again." "You are old," said the youth, "as I mentioned before, and have grown most uncommonly fat. Yet you turned a back somersault in at the door. Pray, what is the reason of that? In my youth, said the sage, as he shook his grey locks, I kept all my limbs very supple. By the use of this ointment, 1 shilling the box. Allow me to sell you a couple. Now, once again, well, I've got time. I can go on. You are old, said the youth, and your jaws are too weak for anything tougher than suet. Yet you finished the goose with the bones and the beak. Pray, how did you manage to do it? In my youth, said his father, I took to the law and argued each case with my wife, and the muscular strength which it gave to my jaw has lasted the rest of my life. Now, so the poem by Southey would be long forgotten. It was long forgotten. It's known today only because the editor of the Annotated Alice brings it up and gives it to us. Was I right in classing Lewis Carroll with Shakespeare as a great poet of the English language? A great poet is a poet who shows the way. In the 21st century, when we have spoken word poetry, sound poetry, slam, the wasteland, remember the 19th, remember Jabberwocky. Now, we've had Englishmen, an American, an Irishman. It seems right to finish with something by a Canadian. To the department heads, to make much of time. This is a poem that comes with an epigraph. The epigraph is something that appeared in New York Magazine about 10, 12 years ago. It's an excerpt, well, I'll just read it. In the late fall of 1983, Professor Harold Bloom did something banal, human, and destructive. He put his hand on a student's inner thigh, a student whom he was tasked with teaching and grading. The student was me, a 20-year-old senior at Yale. Here is why I am telling this story now. And the letter is signed Naomi Wolf. It's in New York Magazine. Naomi Wolf was in Toronto at the Writers' Festival a few months ago, and she was interviewed on CBC. She was on a book tour, and the paper published a beautiful photograph of her with big brown eyes, cascading dark hair. I remember what those babes could do to undergraduates when I was at university a long, long time ago. Not to speak of the conflicts they could engender in the professors. To the department heads, to make much of time. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may, and make a pass if you wish. I'm finishing up for my M.A. You will not find me shrewish. The system works to generate excitement in the cloisters, but ethics patrollers will create an atmosphere less boisterous. Our time will come to have our say, and editors will be buying, and this same flower that smiles today will then be less complying. Then use your time and gallant be, and while you may, seduce me. For when I've got my PhD, your chance is gone to goose me. The book just written by Naomi Wolf that she was promoting on her book tour in Toronto has the title Vagina, a New Biography. Thank you. That's it.